We talk all things LA Kings with Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Well, the LA Kings are on a 5-game road trip. They have lost the first 2 games of the trip, and they've got 3 very tough opponents coming up. And the Kings are in a slump offensively. Here to talk about that and many other things is friend of the show, Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty. You can follow him on X and Twitter at NHL Russell and check out his work at hockeyroyalty.com. Hey, Russell, thanks for doing this. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Eddie. Thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure to have you on. Unfortunately, we're going to talk about a Kings team that is not playing its best hockey at the moment. They've been pretty consistent all year. They had 1 3-game losing skid at the very beginning of the season, but have not had another one since. That is in jeopardy at the moment, though, as they've dropped 2 in a row, as I mentioned, to start this 5-game road trip. Does this feel like kind of one of those inevitable kind of droughts or slumps that every team has or most teams have, or is there a real reason for concern right now, do you feel?
I think it's a little bit of a mix of both. I think a lot of Kings fans probably concerned seeing that we maybe have seen the ceiling of this team already, at least offensively, because that's really been the struggles that you outlined it right to start. I mean, they just can't score right now. Haven't scored more than 2 goals, only once, I guess, in the last 10 games. That's not going to cut it. Even for a team that's good defensively as they are, you have to play perfect defensively if you're going to try to win games 2-1. So, yeah, I mean, offensively, that's where the biggest trouble is right now. And you got to look at individuals right now. You look at Trevor Moore, who hasn't had a goal in 12 games. You look at Anze Kopitar, who hasn't had a goal in 11 games. And I don't know if this is the type of team that should be relying on the back of a player like Anze Kopitar. There should be other players trying to kind of carry the torch a little bit more here, but that's kind of where this team is at right now. But I'm also kind of looking at the schedule that the Kings are kind of playing right now. There's kind of been a lot of twists and turns, I guess, over the last few weeks and so with everything going on in LA. I know they're in the middle, and they're also in the middle of this 12-game stretch where 10 of them are on the road. So I think we're kind of seeing the ebbs and flows of the season kind of come to the point now where it's starting to affect this team and all the road travels that they've been going on. I mean, this is a team that's played the fewest amount of home games in the NHL, and they're also one of the best home teams in the NHL too. So, I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of cause for concern for the offense that they're not able to score right now. But to say that like the ship is sinking, I won't go that far.
I've been talking for most of the season about Trevor Moore. You mentioned Kevin Fiala, Quinton Byfield, that at least one of those guys needed to really get on track to help this offense. Looks like Kevin Fiala might, he's played a couple games recently I thought that have been pretty good. Are you confident that at some point one of those guys will get going when it matters most?
No. I mean, they haven't really given us any confidence that they will. I mean, it's been just really inconsistent all year. And I mean, for a lot of those players throughout their entire NHL career, or at least with their career with the Kings so far. I mean, Kevin Fiala, he's always been this kind of consistent 70-point guy with the Kings at least. But this year he's on pace for just over 50 points. I mean, this is like the PL Dubois of the Kings season, right? I mean, the guy that was projected to come in and be this producer, he's just not doing it. So, and especially for a player who's being paid the highest amount of all your forwards, that's not going to cut it. He has to be better. And it's not even just the lack of offensive production. It's the constant turnovers. I don't know. It just feels like he's just kind of like not into it in certain games. But I mean, lately, yeah, like you said, the last few games it's showing a little bit more promise. So hopefully, he can kind of keep that going. But and then you kind of look at another player like Byfield, you mentioned too. I was hoping to see a little bit more production from him. I know he's been doing a lot of other things well in terms of his defensive side of the game, but that's really just the whole team in general. Yeah, like sure, like we can talk about the defensive side and how it's been playing really well and they're keeping pucks out of their net, but it's now starting to creep into the offensive side of the game where those frustrations are starting to roll over a little bit too. So yeah, I mean, this is a team that just can't focus so much on defense to win games. We've seen this the last few years, that a team that tries so hard to beat you defensively, if it's eventually going to come back to bite you when you play against great teams like the Edmonton Oilers or anyone else. So yeah, I mean, those guys need to start going, or else this team's really not going to go anywhere.
I mean, Fiala, I have high expectations for him, and I definitely agree with you. He hasn't met those, but he is second on the team in goals, so there's that. And you mentioned Byfield doing other things, and he's still young. For me, though, the head scratcher really is Trevor Moore. And I know last year, we see players on occasion in all sports have a spike or a career year, but the quality of goals he scored last year were high quality goals. This was not a guy who just had everything that he shot going off skates and things like that. It was just all going for him. To me, he's the real head scratcher of this. I really am surprised, and I don't really have a good reason for why he's been so unproductive this season.
Yeah, if you kind of look at other players too, you kind of point to maybe a confidence dip a little bit. But even with Trevor, it doesn't seem like that at all. It just seems like it's a player that's just, I don't want to say it's snake bitten, but he just, for whatever reason, can't put the puck in the net. I don't know if it's an injury that's kind of dealing with or whatever. But yeah, it just seems, and now it seems like the frustrations are starting to mount up a little bit more. The game last night in Detroit, I mean, he got that called that, I mean, it was like a phantom high sticking penalty, but then he kind of made contact with the official there. He's lucky he didn't get a little bit more with that. So yeah, you're starting to see the frustrations mount up, and this is a player that's really even keel, really quiet type in the locker room, not necessarily going to be the vocal leader, but yeah, it's starting to creep into the game, his overall game a little bit more, that he can't put the puck in the net, which is a player who, you're coming off a 30-goal season. I don't want to say everybody was expecting him to repeat that, but you're being expected to maybe at least score maybe 20 plus. I mean, so just kind of help the team because you're getting paid pretty well. So, I mean, now that his struggles are kind of continuing, you're seeing him kind of creep into some of these trade proposals as we get closer to the trade deadline.
And we'll definitely talk more about the trade deadline coming up. But the Kings recently switched from that 11-7 setup, 11 forward, 7 defensemen, which has been very successful for them, to the more traditional 12-6, 12 forward, 6 defensemen. Do you think Jim Hiller, is this just a coincidence that they've kind of made this switch and the team isn't playing its best hockey? And do you also see them maybe going back to the 11-7 here soon if this doesn't change?
Oh, I could. I think a little bit of the change is to kind of get ready for the return of Drew Doughty. Obviously, Jim Hiller has some things in mind, and we've also seen some defensive pairings kind of get switched up a little bit, with Jordan Spence now being played with Joel Edmondson, Brian Clark with Jacob Averara. So I'm curious to see what Hiller has in mind there. But as far as the 12-6, I don't know if it's really the big issue in terms of the lack of scoring. I mean, we were all pretty, I guess a lot of Kings fans, we were all pretty happy with the play of Samuel Hellenius and wanted him to get back in the lineup. And he was the one that was kind of sitting at times during that 11-7 alignment. So it's nice to see him back. But to say that's probably the scoring issue, I don't know. I mean, if you're looking at adding a player like Kyle Burrows or switching him out for a Trevor Lewis, what are you really gaining there offensively? So I don't know. Maybe they do go back and he looks to try to ignite a little bit of spark into this lineup. But to say that 12-6 might be something that's causing a little bit of scoring woes, I guess right now, I wouldn't think that. But I mean, with Hiller, I could see with the amount of changes he likes to make in game, I could see the 11-7 being something he kind of goes back to pretty quickly here.
Well, going into this trip, which I thought was going to be one of the Kings' toughest stretches of the year, I thought the first 2 games of the trip were probably the most winnable. They're 0-1-1 with Columbus and Detroit. Now you got Florida and Tampa back-to-back, and you close it out with Carolina. At this point, what's kind of the best-case scenario for the Kings for the rest of this trip?
Oh, man, 3 points out of 6? Maybe?
Yeah.
This back-to-back, you mentioned it, Florida, Tampa Bay, Florida's Stanley Cup champion. They just played the Kings hard. Kings had to play hard just to even scrape out a win to come back in that one. And then you got Tampa Bay on the back end of that. They're going to be looking to have some revenge after the 2-1 win that the Kings had at home just recently. And then you have, like you mentioned, Carolina, who just added Mikko Rantanen of all players. So they're looking really good. I mean, this is definitely the toughest stretch of the season. I mean, that's why I kind of go back to, like, you look at it, the overall picture of this 12-game stretch where they went on the road for 5 games after that postponement against Calgary, when you go to Winnipeg and you have that dramatic win, and you had to go to Edmonton and Calgary and Vancouver, Seattle, and then you're back home for only 4 days to play 2 games, and then you're back on the road again for 5 more games. So to play all these great teams like you just listed off, so it's tough. Yeah, like this stretch, I don't want to make excuses, but this is a real tough stretch of the NHL schedule. This is probably the hardest stretch of the NHL schedule. You can see this is a team that's just kind of like, they need to be like back home and kind of get used to, like, or just get comfortable at least with being in their own surroundings for a little bit, sleeping in their own bed for at least a week or so. Like, so it's just tough, but yeah, like, this is the NHL schedule. Everybody has to go through it. So you can't really just let up in games like this. So yeah, with the 3 games that they have in hand, or at hand coming up with Florida, Tampa Bay, and Carolina, if they can squeak out 3 points out of 6, I'd say that's a win.
Yeah, I actually have to agree with you on that. We do have a break coming up, which may be good timing for the Kings. Also, somebody else returning to the lineup. We're going to talk about that and more with Russell Morgan here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make your play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's the prediction on the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what's happening on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Super Bowl rematch from a couple years ago. You got the Chiefs taking on the Eagles. Kansas City looking for the three-peat, listed as a 1.5 favorite. Over-under is 49.5. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and you could win or score $200 in bonus bets. It's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, we are back with Russell Morgan. And Russell, it looks like Drew Doughty will be returning here very soon. I'm guessing it's going to be Wednesday or Thursday, and might be the perfect time for him to come back because the Kings could obviously use a spark right now. If he does come back in these next couple of games here, your thoughts on the impact he could have with the team?
Yeah, it's going to be huge. I mean, you're talking about a player who's going to want to be playing at least 20 plus minutes in his first game, but I mean, once he gets comfortable, he's going to be eating up 23, 24 minutes a night. So yeah, I mean, that's a huge impact for this roster. I mean, at the beginning of the year, we were talking about who can replace Drew Doughty. Nobody was pretty much the summation of that. So now you have him back in the lineup. It's going to be a massive impact. I'm not going to sit here and say that he's going to like immediately help out the offensive woes that the Kings have going on, but he's certainly going to help. I mean, he's the type of player who's probably one of the best or at least defenseman who's one of the best on the team in terms of breakouts, knowing when to slow down play, knowing when to speed up play. His read of the pace of the play of the game is really probably the best on the Kings. So yeah, like, to get him back in the fold, and not to mention the personality that you have now back on the bench, that fiery player, that's a type of guy that the Kings need right now with the slump that they're in.
Interesting part of his return is his strong desire to play in this Four Nations face-off coming up in a couple of weeks. He's made it no secret he would like to replace Alex Pietrangelo, the Vegas Golden Knights, who recently backed out of the event. Is this a good thing or a bad thing that he has this handful of games to basically audition for Team Canada?
No, I think it's a great thing for Drew Doughty to get the opportunity to go play in the Four Nations. This is a guy who's probably been robbed of the chance to play for his country on a few occasions. He did in the Olympics. I forget when it was. I think it was 2010 or whatever. But yeah, like, I mean, with the NHL players being held out of the Olympics, I mean, we know how passionate Drew is, and probably how passionate he is to play for his country in Canada. Give him the opportunity. If he has a chance to go do it, let him go do it. Like, he should. He's deserved that right to try to go play for his team. And at this point, I'd be surprised if he's not on the roster or if he's not named as a replacement. when a player gets asked if he wants to, or if he's looking forward to the break, and then all of a sudden he turns to and say, "No, I want to play in the Four Nations." That sounds like a player that's already been told, like, "Hey, you're going to go play in the Four Nations." I don't think he would be saying that if he already had the idea that he has that in the back of his mind. So I would certainly think that Drew Doughty's probably going to be the replacement. I would put that like 75% or so. Like it seems like a good idea. So I'm looking forward to seeing Drew playing for Canada. I mean, I don't know how hype I am for this Four Nations. It seems like there's times where I have to feel like I have to pull myself to be like ready to get like excited for this Four Nations tournament. But I mean, like I was already excited to watch to see what Adrian Kempe can do. I feel like that's going to be a great platform for him to showcase his talent for people outside of the LA area who already know how great of a player he is. But now we get the added benefit of seeing Drew Doughty probably playing for Canada. That'd be pretty fun too. So not to mention all the good matchups that we see with all these great superstar players, but now we get an extra superstar now going in Drew Doughty. That'd be pretty fun. So I think it'd be good not only for the player to see him playing for Team Canada, but also maybe get him up to speed a little bit too as the NHL season ramps up toward the playoffs coming up.
And I would imagine the powers that be with Team Canada obviously want to see what he looks like over these handful of games before they have to make a decision. So even extra motivation for him to come out and kind of play well and show what he can do. So I guess that's a good thing as well.
Dubas, when he was out in Pittsburgh, I believe, met with Doughty a couple of times, and he's the GM for Canada. So I'm sure that conversation was had, like, where are you at? How are you feeling? What's your interest? So, yeah, I'm sure Drew, like, once he was asked, he's like, yeah, I'm all for it. So I would, like I said, I would be surprised if he's not the replacement.
It's been talked about a lot over the last few months in different places as far as where Drew would come into the lineup. The way things are going, I imagine it would make it a little bit easier to kind of put him back in his old spot with Mikey Anderson on the top pairing. But certainly the way Vladislav Gavrikov has played all season, which has been amazing, it gives you maybe a decision to make for Jim Hiller, at least initially. Where do you think that Drew will draw back into the lineup, or where would you put him in the lineup when he comes back here?
Yeah, I'd go right back to 44-8. I mean, as good as 44-84 have been together, there's really not a lot of offensive benefit to those two. They're really good at shutdown defensive pairing, great at that. But that's really not what you want from your top pair. I mean, you want that maybe from like another pair that you don't rely on. But when it's late in the game, you're down by one, and your top pair is two defensive type players, that's kind of hard to deploy. So yeah, I would say just go straight to 44-8. And then as far as your second pairing, I would love to see Gavrikov play with Clark. I think Edmondson and Spence have been playing pretty well together, and I think Gavrikov would give Clark a little bit better of a defensive partner than he maybe has had in Joel Edmondson. So yeah, and maybe give Clark a little bit of freedom, because it's been weird, like, watching this Brandt Clark deployment over the stretch that this Kings team is in right now. At the beginning of the season, it felt like Brandt Clark was just playing with the training wheels off. It was just no leash, just go out there and be Brandt Clark. And then we started hearing these weird kind of comments from Jim Hiller where he talked about how Clark needed to focus on his defensive game, and maybe he was doing a little too much and playing like and then he had that game where he was playing as a forward for whatever reason. Like they just need to give Clark, take the training wheels off. Just let him be Clark again. Like, he was playing so well, and we're starting to see the dip in production because of it. So if you give Clark that Gavrikov pairing, maybe you can get him a little bit more of, I guess, a cushion if things go wrong with Gavrikov as opposed to Edmondson on that side. So I think that would be a better top four. And then with the way Jordan Spence has been playing, maybe elevate his game a little bit more. I think you can maybe have him play or elevate his game even more so with Joel Edmondson as opposed to Moverara, and possibly have Moverara be the seventh defenseman if they allude to go the 11-7 lineup again.
All right, up next, we're going to talk about if the Kings are going to make any significant moves before the trade deadline. That is next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, those of us who live in Southern California, so lucky. We got so many amazing live events we can go to, sports, theater events, concerts, comedy shows. And when you go to those events, no matter where you are, you need to do what I do for your ticket needs, and that is use Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff, shows you only the incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. The all-in pricing feature shows you the total up front. You've got no surprises. at checkout with any extra fees, and you'll get the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, we're wrapping it up with Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty, and wanted to get into Rob Blake and the trade deadline for the LA Kings, which is coming up here, I believe, March 7th. But interesting that we've got this Four Nations tournament. We've seen this huge trade with Mikko Rantanen, and it seems like we might have two trade deadlines, one before the Four Nations and one after. Any players that are going to participate in this event, some GMs want to move them beforehand because obviously they get hurt in the tournament, then their trade value is suddenly gone. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out if we see some deals before this event coming up. Matt Larkin from the Daily Faceoff did a scouting report on every NHL GM, and he put them into tiers. He had tier 1 was the Cowboys, these guys that are going to go all in to chase a championship. Tier 2 was the spot guys who will kind of make a big move in spots here and there. 3 was the wild cards, guys who have at times made big moves, but not, you don't know what to expect from them. And then there was tier 4, the moderate spenders. And probably not a surprise that Kings GM Rob Blake was in tier 4. First of all, I guess, would you agree that that's where Rob Blake belongs?
I would probably put him that tier, maybe above that. I mean, he's tried to make moves. Have they paid off? Probably not. But I mean, this is a GM who traded Jonathan Quick, the franchise's best goaltender in the middle of the season. So he's not afraid to make big moves. That's I won't say that he won't. So I'd maybe put him a tier above that. But I think a little bit of the, I guess, discourse around it is how those moves have kind of worked out for the Kings.
Obviously, he is in the final year of his contract. Does that, in your mind, affect anything he does at the trade deadline?
I think it could. Pressure certainly seems like it's on. I'm not going to sit here and say that he's going to be gone if things go badly for this team. I've kind of I thought he would have been gone after last year, after the whole PLD thing and whatever. Like most GMs probably would have, but no, he was able to sign a new head coach. So I've kind of come to the conclusion that I think he's just going to be around to the end of Anze Kopitar's run and say like, okay, well, I'll be here with Kopi, and then once Kopi's done, then it probably be like a retool or whatever after that. So who knows? But yeah, like, I don't know. I think it's going to be the GM is just going to stick and try to make moves and until his contract's done. And if things go well, maybe he sticks around. If things don't, I think he sticks around anyway.
Well, his biggest move to date at a true deadline deal was 2023 when he added Jonas Korpisalo and Vladislav Gavrikov from the Blue Jackets. We've heard names like Kyle Palmieri and Jake Evans, and with all due respect, those are hardly names that are going to really excite your fan base. Do you see Blake continuing the trend of, not going out and making any kind of a big deal? Is it going to be just pieces to kind of supplement the roster? Is that what you're envisioning at this point?
Yeah, it's kind of leaning toward that way. I mean, I've thought about those names too. Kyle Palmieri, one probably on the higher of my list of names to watch for if you're a Kings fan. So played in Southern California with the Ducks, familiar with Hiller, playing in New York. I believe Hiller was an assistant coach at the same time, so there's some familiarity there. He's also a right shot who scored 30-plus goals last year. So it kind of checks all the boxes of what the Kings need. Isn't it an exciting name? Like you said, probably not. So I don't know if it's going to put the Kings from a contender or from a playoff team to all of a sudden like a Stanley Cup contender. So I don't know. I mean, there's also other names that are kind of floating out there, especially with everything going on in Vancouver. Brock Besser's the UFA coming up. Yeah, there's going to be other free agents. I mean, Brock Nelson, also another Brock there on the island. I believe he's a UFA. He's a left shot forward. I'd love to see the Kings just go big game hunting. And if Rob Blake's really going to be, like you said, his contract's coming up and he doesn't know where he kind of sees the sun setting, I would just love to see him go big game hunting. And I know it's kind of a wishful thinking to see the Canucks maybe make a big move with the Kings. But, I mean, to see a player like JT Miller become available, I would love a player like JT Miller on my team. Maybe comes across a little bit too brash at times. I mean, we've heard about his time in New York where maybe he was yelling at his teammate and Henrik Lundqvist and getting shouting matches there. We've seen it obviously at times going on with Vancouver and his kind of back and forth with Elias Pettersson. But this is a fiery player that just wants to win. And for a Kings team that kind of needs more fiery, passionate players who just want to win, like if I'm Rob Blake and that player is available, I would go and make that trade tenfold. Like that's the type of player that this Kings team needs. I mean, you look at up and down the lineup too. I mean, he's been one of the best players in terms of power play production, not just on the Canucks, but in the entire NHL. So yeah, like to see that name become available, like that would totally pique my interest. It's just how are you going to convince the Canucks to be able to trade a player like that in your own division, and what can the Kings do to even package together a trade package to get that type of player? I mean, you look at players up and down the lineup that maybe could be pieces. Fiala has a no movement clause. Deneau has a no trade clause. And what are you really going to get out of Trevor Moore, who doesn't really have any production with everything that's going on with him this season? So it's tough. It's a tough position that the Kings are in, because if they really want to improve this lineup, yeah, sure, you could trade like a first-round pick or even some prospects, but you look at the prospect pool, and as excited as we are for maybe players like Liam Greentree and Carter George, that's really all there is. It's pretty barren. So, I mean, they were just ranked like 27th, I believe, on the Athletic prospect pool. So it's kind of tough to make big moves when you don't really have the prospects or maybe even the draft picks to do it. But I mean, and with the Kings with the situation the Kings are in, I would pull the trigger. I would go for it and just say, hey, if we're only got 2 more seasons and maybe 1 more season this year and then 1 more season next year, Vonjeh Kopitar, this is really the time to do it.
All right. Well, that is Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty. He is a must follow on X and Twitter at NHL Russell. Always has some good stuff to share. You can check out his work at hockeyroyalty.com as well. Russell, always enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate you coming on and joining us. And hopefully the Kings will get things turned around here in the near future. And we'll get you back on certainly before the playoffs as well. So thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks for doing this.
Yeah, appreciate it, Eddie. Thanks.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that as well. And that'll do it for today's show. For your everydayers, those of you that listen to watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Wednesday, obviously we'll be recapping the Kings-Panthers game shortly after the conclusion of that game. We'll have a post-game show. That's a 4 p.m. LA time face-off time in Florida. Catch all the action on the FanDuel Sports Network, ESPN Plus nationally. You can hear it on the 710 ESPN app. And then join us afterwards to talk about the game. If you want to stay interactive with the show, email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you're always welcome to post your thoughts if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section. And you can follow us on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you on Wednesday. And as always, go Kings, go.